The internal concert marked a quiet turning point for Daniel even though nothing dramatic happened that night. The hall was fuller than before with instructors visiting faculty and a few invited guests. The atmosphere carried expectation, but not spectacle. Daniel waited backstage listening to other students perform. Some played with confidence, others with visible nerves. He noticed how each person carried sound differently. It reminded him that music revealed character as much as skill. When his turn arrived, he walked to the piano calmly, his breathing steady. He no longer felt like a guest in the space. He felt present. He played the piece he had chosen with care, allowing space between phrases. His touch was lighter than before but more controlled. The music spoke gently but clearly. When he finished, the response was thoughtful rather than loud. Instructors nodded quietly, a few exchanged notes. Daniel bowed and stepped away without searching for reaction. Backstage, he felt relief, not excitement. He understood that this performance was part of a process, not a destination. In the days that followed, feedback arrived slowly. Instructors spoke with him individually, pointing out areas of growth and places where deeper focus was needed. Daniel listened attentively and asked questions. No one praised him excessively and no one dismissed him. The balance felt right. The director met with Daniel and his mother again. His tone was consistent and grounded. He explained that Daniel's progress was steady and meaningful. He emphasized patience and long-term commitment. He suggested increasing Daniel's involvement slightly. More ensemble work, more theory, more listening assignments. The plan felt demanding but reasonable. Daniel accepted without hesitation. He trusted the structure now. As responsibilities grew, Daniel learned to manage time carefully. He created routines for practice, rest, and schoolwork. Discipline became a source of stability rather than pressure. There were difficult weeks when exhaustion returned sharply, especially during school exams. Daniel struggled to focus and frustration surfaced. One evening, he considered skipping practice entirely, feeling overwhelmed. But instead he sat at the piano and played softly without agenda. The sound helped him reset. His instructors noticed these moments of self-awareness and encouraged balance, reminding him that resilience mattered more than intensity. Outside the hall, Daniel's relationships shifted subtly. Classmates noticed his discipline and focus. Some asked questions, others kept distance. Daniel remained quiet about his work. He preferred letting music remain personal rather than performative. At school, the music teacher invited Daniel to help younger students during group activities. He guided them gently, focusing on listening rather than correction. The experience surprised him. He realized he enjoyed helping others feel safe with sound. It felt familiar. Back at the hall, the program introduced collaborative projects. Students paired in small groups to interpret pieces together. Daniel was partnered with an older student who initially seemed distant. At first, rehearsals felt tense. Different habits, different expectations. But Daniel approached the work with patience. He listened carefully and adjusted without losing his voice. Gradually, trust formed between them. The music improved. The older student acknowledged Daniel's sensitivity openly. The partnership became one of mutual respect. The director observed this collaboration and noted Daniel's adaptability. He commented privately that leadership often looked like listening first. Daniel carried those words with him. As months passed, a regional youth performance opportunity emerged. Not competitive but representative. A chance for selected students to perform at a neighboring institution. Daniel's name appeared on the list quietly. The invitation felt significant but not overwhelming. Preparation began with careful guidance. Instructors emphasized clarity, consistency, and rest. Daniel practiced steadily without pushing beyond his limits. The night of the performance, the venue felt unfamiliar but welcoming. The audience attentive rather than judgmental. Daniel's performance was calm and grounded. His sound carried maturity beyond his age. When he finished, the applause felt genuine. Afterward, a visiting instructor approached and praised his musical honesty. Daniel thanked him politely, but did not linger. On the way home, Daniel reflected on how different this felt from the first time he had played in front of strangers. There was no fear, no urge to disappear. Music had become a conversation rather than a defense. Back at the hall, his peers treated him with growing respect, not admiration but trust. Daniel valued this more than praise. His mother noticed changes too. Daniel spoke more confidently about his goals. He asked thoughtful questions about the future. They discussed possibilities openly without pressure. Understanding that paths could change. One evening, Daniel shared one of his original melodies with his mother for the first time. She listened quietly and smiled with tears in her eyes. She said it sounded like him, not like anyone else. The words stayed with Daniel. As the season continued, the director announced that the program would culminate in a formal evaluation later in the year. The outcome would determine advanced placement for some students. The announcement stirred nerves among the group. Daniel felt them too, but not as sharply as before. He trusted his work. and his pace preparation intensified gradually. Instructors focused on refinement, not transformation. Daniel responded with focus and care. There were setbacks, moments when progress felt stalled. But he no longer interpreted them as failure. He learned to step back, adjust, and continue. Late one evening, Daniel stayed behind after practice. The hall empty and quiet. He played one of his original pieces softly. The director passed by unnoticed and paused to listen from the doorway. He did not interrupt or comment later. He simply nodded at Daniel as he left. The gesture carried respect. Daniel walked home that night feeling steady. Not proud, not anxious, just grounded. He understood now that growth did not announce itself. It revealed itself slowly through consistency. The boy who once felt small in a grand hall now carried that hall within him. And he was ready for what came next. The formal evaluation period approached gradually rather than suddenly. But Daniel felt its presence in the way rehearsals became more focused and conversations more intentional. Instructors spoke less about possibility and more about preparation. Daniel did not panic. But he became more aware of his habits, how he practiced, how he rested, how he listened. He understood now that consistency mattered more than intensity. His days followed a steady rhythm. School in the morning, practice in the afternoon, structured lessons in the evening. Fatigue still appeared, but it no longer controlled him. One instructor worked closely with him on tone and balance, helping him shape sound without forcing it. Daniel learned that strength could exist without tension. Another instructor focused on interpretation, asking Daniel to explain what a piece meant to him before playing it. This exercise deepened his connection to music. Daniel realized that understanding his own intention made performance feel grounded, rather than exposed. As evaluation week neared, the atmosphere among students shifted. Some grew anxious, others competitive. Daniel noticed but did not absorb it. He stayed focused on his own process. One afternoon, a younger student approached him asking for help with a difficult passage. Daniel agreed and worked patiently, guiding rather than correcting. The student thanked him with relief. That moment reminded Daniel how far he had come. Not in skill alone, but in confidence. At home, his mother noticed his calm and asked whether he was nervous. Daniel answered honestly that he was, but not afraid. He said music no longer felt like a test. The evaluation began over several days. Each student performed individually and in small groups. Instructors observed quietly, taking notes. When Daniel's turn arrived, he walked to the piano with steady breath. The hall felt familiar rather than intimidating. He played a classical piece with clarity and control. His technique steady, his phrasing thoughtful. Small imperfections appeared, but did not interrupt flow. He followed with a short original piece, simple but expressive. The instructors listened carefully. Some leaned forward without realizing it. When he finished, Daniel stood quietly and waited. There was no immediate response. The silence felt reflective rather than judgmental. The next sessions involved sight reading and collaborative work. Daniel adapted calmly, listening closely to others and responding with care. The instructors noted his flexibility and musical awareness. These qualities mattered deeply in their evaluation. After the final session, the students were dismissed while the faculty met privately. Daniel returned home and waited without overthinking. 2 days later, the director called Daniel and his mother in for a meeting. His tone was calm and direct. He explained that Daniel had shown strong growth, technical stability, and rare emotional clarity. He emphasized that Daniel's approach to music demonstrated maturity beyond his age. The evaluation panel recommended Daniel for advanced placement within the program, along with extended mentorship and performance opportunities. Daniel felt relief but not surprise. The decision felt earned rather than dramatic. The director also spoke about responsibility. Advanced placement came with higher expectations and visibility. Daniel listened carefully and accepted without hesitation. His mother thanked the director quietly, pride and gratitude visible in her expression. As Daniel stepped into the advanced level, his routine shifted again. Practice hours increased, repertoire became more demanding. But the foundation he had built supported the change. He worked closely with a mentor who challenged him without overwhelming him. They discussed long-term goals rather than short-term results. Daniel learned to plan ahead, breaking large challenges into manageable steps. Outside the hall, new opportunities appeared. Invitations to play at small community events, educational programs, and collaborative concerts. Daniel accepted selectively. He valued experiences that emphasized connection rather than display. At one community event, Daniel recognized faces from his early school days, people who remembered him as quiet and reserved. Seeing him play brought warm reactions. Daniel greeted them politely, but did not dwell on attention. Back at the hall, the director watched his progress with quiet approval. Their interactions were respectful and balanced. Authority had transformed into guidance. One evening, after a rehearsal, the director spoke briefly with Daniel. He said leadership was learning when to step back. The words felt reflective. Daniel carried them forward despite progress. Challenges continued. Some advanced pieces tested Daniel's patience, progress slowed at times. Frustration surfaced briefly in those moments. Daniel returned to listening rather than pushing. He learned to step away and return with clarity. His mentors supported this approach, reminding him that growth was not linear. As months passed, Daniel's confidence settled into something stable. Not dependent on praise or reaction, he no longer remembered the laughter clearly. It felt distant and small compared to the silence that followed his playing. One night Daniel stayed late practicing alone, the hall empty and quiet. He played softly without agenda. The sound felt complete, not perfect, but honest. The director passed by again unnoticed and paused briefly, then continued walking without comment. Daniel finished playing and closed the piano gently. He understood now that respect was not demanded. It was earned through consistency, humility, and listening. And he was ready to carry that understanding into whatever came next. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. Advanced placement changed the pace of Daniel's life in ways he felt immediately. Expectations grew, but so did trust. Instructors no longer watched him for mistakes, but listened for intention. The shift felt subtle yet powerful. His practice sessions became more focused and efficient. He learned to set goals for each session and to stop before exhaustion erased clarity. Rest became part of discipline rather than avoidance. Daniel worked closely with his mentor, who encouraged questions rather than answers. They spoke often about why a piece mattered and how emotion could live inside structure. These conversations shaped Daniel, understanding more than hours of repetition ever had. He began performing more frequently in small settings. Community rooms, school gatherings, and educational programs. These spaces felt honest and grounded. People listened without expectation, and Daniel responded with openness. Each performance strengthened his ability to stay present. He learned to breathe through nerves and to accept imperfection without losing direction. The fear that once followed him faded into awareness rather than control. At school, Daniel teachers noticed his growing confidence. He spoke more clearly in class and helped classmates without hesitation. Music had taught him patience and listening, which carried into other parts of life. One afternoon, a classmate asked why he never seemed rushed or angry. Daniel thought for a moment and said that listening slowed everything down. The answer surprised even him. At home, his relationship with his mother deepened. They spoke openly about future possibilities without pressure. She supported his choices without trying to guide them. Trust flowed both ways. Daniel continued composing quietly, short pieces shaped by memory and feeling. He shared some with his mentor, who encouraged refinement without altering their core. Originality became something to protect rather than prove. As his reputation grew within the program, invitations arrived more often. Some offered visibility, others offered growth. Daniel learned to distinguish between the two and chose carefully. The director remained present but distant, his role now one of oversight rather than control. He trusted the process he had once doubted. During one rehearsal, the director addressed the group briefly. He spoke about responsibility and humility. He said that talent without respect collapsed under its own weight. Daniel listened, knowing the words were shaped by experience. A regional collaboration brought Daniel together with students from other institutions. The environment felt unfamiliar and competitive. Old nerves flickered briefly. During the first rehearsal, Daniel noticed tension among the group. Everyone tried to stand out. Sound clashed and listening suffered. Daniel chose a different approach. He focused on blending rather than leading, adjusting his dynamics and timing to support others. Gradually, the group sound softened and improved. The change surprised everyone. After the session, one student thanked Daniel for creating space. The comment felt meaningful. Daniel realized leadership often moved quietly. The collaboration culminated in a shared performance. The result felt balanced and sincere. Applause followed, but what mattered more was the connection formed on stage. Back at the hall, Daniel mentors acknowledged his growth in maturity and presence. They encouraged him to consider long-term paths, including advanced study and teaching. Daniel reflected deeply on this. He enjoyed performing, but felt equally drawn to guiding others. The idea of helping someone feel safe with sound felt right. One evening, Daniel returned to the hall alone after hours, the building quiet and familiar. He sat at the piano and played softly without plan. Memories surfaced of the first time he had entered the space feeling small and unsure. The laughter that had greeted him then felt distant and unreal. The silence that followed his playing now felt like home. As he finished the piece, he did not rush to leave. He sat quietly listening to the room, understanding that belonging was not granted by others. It was built slowly through honesty and care. Daniel stood and closed the piano gently. He felt ready for the final chapter of the program, not as a test, but as a transition. He no longer measured his worth by reaction or approval. He trusted the work and the listening it required. and he knew that whatever came next would be shaped by the same quiet strength that had carried him this far. The final phase of the program arrived without ceremony. Daniel did not feel a sense of ending so much as a sense of direction. What once felt like a trial now felt like a continuation of work already in motion. He prepared for the closing performance with calm focus. There was no pressure from instructors beyond clarity and honesty. The expectation was not perfection, but presence. Daniel chose a program that reflected who he had become. One piece grounded in structure and one shaped by personal expression. The balance felt right. The night of the performance, the hall filled quietly. Not with spectacle, but with attention. Familiar faces sat beside new ones. Instructors, students, families, and guests shared the same space. Daniel walked onto the stage with steady breath. He did not search the room for reaction. He sat and allowed silence to settle naturally. When he began to play, the sound carried confidence without force. His hands moved with intention. Each phrase felt connected to the next. The hall responded by listening deeply. The second piece revealed more of him, shaped by memory, patience, and growth. It did not ask for approval. It offered truth. When the final sound faded, Daniel remained still for a moment, then stood. The response that followed was warm and sustained. Not loud but sincere. He bowed quietly and left the stage feeling complete, rather than relieved. After the performance, instructors gathered with students informally. Feedback flowed naturally. Conversation replaced evaluation. Daniel felt part of a community rather than a program. The director approached him later without formality. He thanked Daniel for the work he had done, and for the lesson he had taught without trying. He said that laughter had once been easier than listening, and that Daniel had changed that for him. Daniel listened respectfully and thanked him in return. Understanding that growth often moved in both directions. In the weeks that followed, Daniel received offers and suggestions. Advanced study, mentorship roles, collaborative projects. None were framed as rescue or reward. He took time to consider each path carefully. Speaking with his mentor and his mother openly, Daniel chose a path that allowed continued study alongside community teaching. He wanted to grow without leaving others behind. The decision felt honest. He began assisting younger students formally, guiding them gently through listening exercises and simple pieces. He recognized himself in their hesitation and curiosity. He never told them his story unless asked. He focused instead on helping them feel safe with sound. Music continued to deepen for him. Not through speed or volume, but through patience and care. He still practiced daily, but with balance, rest, and reflection held equal value. Years later, Daniel returned to the hall where everything had begun. Not as a student, but as a guest mentor. The space felt familiar and welcoming. A young boy sat near the door watching quietly as Daniel played during a workshop. Daniel noticed the look and remembered his own first day. He invited the boy closer without calling attention. The boy listened and smiled softly. Daniel understood then that the cycle continued not through grand moments, but through small acts of listening. As the session ended, the hall filled briefly with applause, then settled into calm silence. Daniel closed the piano gently and stood. Gratitude settled in his chest without weight. He had not proven anything. He had learned to listen, and to trust that listening would carry him forward. The laughter that once challenged him no longer mattered. The silence that followed had shaped his life, and he carried it with him always. The rehearsal hall was already filled with quiet confidence long before the boy entered. Polished wooden floors reflected tall windows, and a grand piano stood at the center, as if it belonged only to those who had earned the right to touch it. The space carried years of tradition and judgment. Every sound inside it was measured. The director stood near the front, speaking loudly with staff members. His voice carried authority and habit. He had spent decades deciding who mattered and who did not. His reputation was built on talent but also on ego. People laughed easily at his jokes because they wanted his approval. The boy arrived with his mother and waited near the door. He was thin and small for his age, wearing a plain sweater and worn shoes. His posture showed respect but also uncertainty. He had never been inside a place like this before. The size of the room alone made him feel smaller. His name was Daniel. He was 12 years old, and music had been part of his life long before anyone noticed. His father used to play old songs on a broken keyboard at home, teaching Daniel by sound rather than rules. When his father passed away, the keyboard remained, and Daniel kept playing even when no one listened. Music became something private for him, something that helped him survive quiet evenings and loud thoughts. He never imagined it could bring him into a place like this. The director noticed Daniel standing near the door and raised an eyebrow. He asked who the boy was and why he was there. The assistant explained that Daniel had been invited to observe after a local teacher mentioned his potential. The director smiled dismissively. He looked Daniel up and down and laughed lightly. He made a joke about how everyone wanted to be a pianist these days. then said loudly that if the boy played well he would get on his knees. The people nearby laughed politely. Daniel felt his face grow warm. He looked down at the floor. He did not understand the joke fully, but he understood enough to feel small. His mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, but said nothing. The director waved his hand and told Daniel to sit at the piano if he wanted to try. His tone suggested amusement rather than invitation. The room quieted slightly, not out of respect but curiosity. Daniel hesitated. He had never played on a piano like this. The keys looked heavier. The sound felt intimidating even before he touched it, but something inside him pushed forward, not pride but instinct. He walked slowly toward the bench and sat down. His feet barely touched the floor. He adjusted himself the way his father had shown him years ago. Without realizing he was doing it, the director leaned back, crossing his arms, already smiling as if waiting for proof that his joke would land. Staff members watched closely, some with doubt, some with interest. Daniel placed his hands on the keys. The surface felt cold and smooth. He took a breath and pressed the first note. The sound filled the room more fully than he expected. It was clear and strong. He played another note, then another, slowly at first, finding balance. The laughter in the room faded into silence without anyone noticing. When it stopped, Daniel forgot where he was. The hall disappeared. The director disappeared. He played the way he always did at home, letting memory guide his fingers. The melody was simple but honest. As the music grew, the room changed. People leaned forward, expressions softened. The director uncrossed his arms without realizing it. His smile faded into focus. Daniel played with care. Each phrase carried feeling rather than technique. It was not perfect, but it was real. The piano responded to him as if recognizing his touch. The director stood slowly, his posture no longer relaxed. Disbelief crept into his expression. He took a step closer. The joke he had made earlier felt distant now. When Daniel finished the final note, he lifted his hands gently. The sound lingered in the air. The room remained silent. Not because people were unsure, but because they were listening. Daniel looked up expecting laughter or correction. Instead, he saw faces frozen in attention. The director stared at him with something close to shock. The boy stood slowly, unsure whether he had done something wrong. His mother watched from the side with her hand over her mouth. Tears forming quietly. The director cleared his throat, but no words came immediately. The power in the room had shifted. The joke had lost its weight. Daniel stepped back from the piano, ready to return to the door, unaware that the moment had already changed the course of his life. The hall that once judged him had fallen silent because of him. And this was only the beginning. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, the silence after Daniel finished playing did not feel empty. It felt full and heavy, as if the room itself needed time to breathe. No one moved at first, even the air felt still. The director remained standing near the piano, staring at the boy, with an expression he had never shown before. Daniel stood beside the bench, unsure what to do next. His hands felt warm and unsteady. He expected someone to laugh again or tell him to stop wasting time. Instead, the people around him looked unsure of how to respond. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had quietly disappeared. The director finally spoke, but his voice sounded different now, lower and slower. He asked Daniel where he had learned to play like that. The question carried curiosity rather than mockery. It surprised everyone, including Daniel. Daniel answered honestly that his father had taught him by listening. He said they never had lessons or books, only sound and memory. His voice shook slightly as he spoke, not from fear, but from the effort of being heard. The director nodded slowly, as if processing something unfamiliar. He looked at the piano, then back at Daniel. The joke he had made earlier seemed distant and misplaced now. Some staff members exchanged glances. A few whispered quietly. One assistant suggested they continue with the rehearsal schedule. But the director raised his hand gently and told everyone to wait. He asked Daniel if he could play again, not to prove anything but to continue. The request was simple and respectful. Daniel looked at his mother briefly. She nodded encouragingly, though her eyes were still wet. Daniel sat back at the piano and played another piece, this one softer and slower. The melody carried calm rather than surprise. The room listened deeply. Some people closed their eyes without realizing it. When the final note faded, the silence returned, but it felt different now, warmer and more accepting. The director did not speak immediately. He walked a few steps closer and stood beside the piano. He admitted quietly that he had underestimated the boy. The words were not dramatic, but they carried weight. For someone like him, acknowledgement was rare and difficult. He asked Daniel if he had ever performed in front of others before. Daniel shook his head and said he only played at home. The director looked thoughtful rather than impressed. The director then turned to the staff and told them to clear the schedule for a moment. Murmurs followed, but no one argued. The authority in his voice had shifted from arrogance to intention. Daniel felt overwhelmed by the attention. He did not understand what was happening. He worried that he might be in trouble for interrupting the rehearsal. His mother held his hand tightly, as if grounding them both. The director asked Daniel and his mother to sit with him for a brief conversation. They moved to the side of the hall away from the piano. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. He asked about Daniel's background, his schooling, his daily life. The questions were careful and measured. Daniel answered simply without exaggeration. His mother added details quietly. The director listened without interruption. Something about the honesty in their voices held his attention. This was not a performance anymore, it was a reality he could not ignore. He explained that talent like Daniel could not be left to chance. But he also acknowledged that pressure could destroy what was natural. The admission surprised those nearby. He suggested a private follow-up session on another day. No audience, no jokes, just listening. He made it clear that nothing was promised, and that expectations should remain realistic. Daniel nodded, though he did not fully understand what that meant. His mother thanked the director politely, still unsure whether to feel hope or caution. As they prepared to leave, the director stopped Daniel briefly and said something that stayed with him. He said that courage was not loud and that Daniel had shown it without knowing. The rehearsal resumed after they left. But the atmosphere was different. The director played with less show and more thought. Staff members moved quietly. The piano sounded warmer than before. Daniel and his mother stepped out into the hallway. The noise of the city returned suddenly. Daniel felt lightheaded, as if waking from a dream. On the way home, he asked his mother whether he had done something wrong. She smiled through tears and said no. She said he had done exactly what he was meant to do that evening. Daniel sat at the old keyboard at home and played softly. The keys were uneven and the sound imperfect, but it felt safe. He replayed moments from the hall in his mind. The silence, the faces, the change. He wondered why people laughed before listening, and why listening changed everything. In the days that followed, the director kept his word and invited Daniel back, this time without audience or comments. Only a few trusted teachers attended. Daniel played again, this time with less fear and more presence. The teachers listened carefully, taking notes, not judging but observing. They spoke afterward about potential and patience, about the importance of protecting joy before shaping skill. Daniel did not understand all the words, but he felt something steady forming inside him. A sense that music could be more than something private. Still, nothing changed immediately. Daniel returned to school and routine. Life continued as before. But something inside him had shifted quietly. The hall no longer felt like a place of judgment in his memory. It felt like a door that had opened briefly, and then closed gently. He did not know when it would open again or what waited behind it. But he knew now that laughter did not decide his worth. Listening did. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, the days after the private session passed slowly for Daniel. Life returned to familiar routines, but his thoughts did not. School felt louder than before, classrooms felt smaller, and silence carried more meaning than it ever had. He sat in lessons watching dust float in the air while melodies played quietly in his mind. Teachers spoke, but his focus drifted toward sound and memory. He was not distracted in a careless way, but absorbed in something deeper. At home, the old keyboard waited in the corner as it always had. Daniel played every evening, but now with a new awareness. He listened more closely to his own touch, noticing where emotion guided him and where control was missing. His mother watched him quietly from the kitchen doorway. She sensed the change but did not interrupt. She feared pushing him might break something fragile. A week later, a letter arrived from the hall. It was simple and formal, inviting Daniel to attend a short assessment program over several weeks. No promises were made. The tone was careful and neutral. Daniel read the letter twice without fully understanding it. His mother read it slowly and felt both hope and fear settle in her chest. Opportunity carried weight. They discussed it late into the night. Practical concerns surfaced quickly: transportation time, cost, Daniel's school schedule. The fear of disappointment loomed quietly between them. In the end, they agreed to try. Not because they expected a future from it, but because they did not want regret to replace curiosity. The first day of the assessment program, Daniel arrived early. The hall felt different without an audience, quieter, more focused. The piano room no longer seemed intimidating, but it still demanded respect. A small group of instructors greeted him. Their manner was calm and professional. They did not praise or tease. They simply asked him to sit and play. Daniel played several short pieces from memory, some joyful, some reflective. The instructors listened without interruption, occasionally asking him to repeat a passage or slow down. They tested his rhythm, his ear, his ability to adapt. Daniel struggled at times, but he did not panic. He corrected himself naturally. The instructors noticed this carefully. After playing, they spoke with him about sound and intention rather than mistakes. The conversation felt strange but encouraging. Daniel realized no one was trying to trap him. The director observed from a distance during these sessions, no longer loud or commanding. He watched quietly, taking notes. His presence no longer felt heavy as weeks passed. Daniel attended regularly, balancing school and travel with growing discipline. Exhaustion followed, but excitement outweighed it. Some days he felt confident. Other days doubt returned sharply. He worried that he was falling behind children who had years of formal training. Frustration surfaced when his fingers could not match his imagination. One instructor noticed this and spoke gently. She explained that imagination was a gift, not a flaw. Technique would follow if patience was allowed. Those words stayed with Daniel. At school, Daniel kept his new routine private. He did not share his experience with classmates. Music felt personal and unprotected. He feared misunderstanding. Only one teacher noticed his change, a music teacher who asked him to stay after class one day. Daniel hesitated but stayed. The teacher asked whether Daniel played an instrument. Daniel nodded quietly and said yes. The teacher smiled and said listening mattered more than speaking. In music, Daniel felt understood in a way that surprised him. Back at the hall, the instructors introduced basic theory slowly, not overwhelming him. Daniel learned names for sounds he already knew. Chords, intervals, structure. He absorbed information quickly. Not because it was easy, but because it finally connected to something real. The director met with Daniel and his mother near the end of the assessment period. His tone was serious, but respectful. He explained that Daniel showed unusual musical intuition and emotional awareness. However, formal training would be demanding and long. There would be pressure and expectation. He made it clear that talent alone did not guarantee success. Discipline, patience, and resilience mattered more. Daniel listened carefully. His mother asked practical questions about support, scheduling, and cost. The director answered honestly. He offered Daniel a place in a junior development program with partial support. It was not a full scholarship, but it was a beginning. The decision weighed heavily on Daniel, joy mixed with fear. The path ahead looked both exciting and exhausting. He asked for time to think. The director agreed without surprise. The respect felt new and grounding. At home, Daniel played late into the night, not practicing but listening. He tried to imagine his life shaped by music. Beyond his room, he thought about the laughter that had first greeted him, and the silence that followed. Both felt distant now. He realized that music had already changed his life. Even if nothing else happened. The next morning, Daniel told his mother he wanted to try. Not because he wanted applause or approval, but because he wanted to learn honestly. She hugged him tightly, understanding the courage it took to choose uncertainty. When they returned to the hall to accept the offer, the director nodded simply and welcomed them. No jokes, no promises, only clarity. The program began quietly. Daniel joined a small group of students who came from different backgrounds but shared the same hunger to learn. Some were confident, others anxious. Daniel felt both at once. He learned to practice with purpose rather than escape, to rest when needed, to accept correction without losing heart. The director observed his progress occasionally, offering guidance rather than dominance. Something in him had shifted too. Daniel no longer felt like a boy who had stumbled into a grand hall by accident. He felt like someone who had been invited to listen and respond. And the journey ahead was just beginning. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, the junior development program began quietly, without ceremony or attention. Daniel entered the new routine feeling both eager and uncertain. The hall that once felt intimidating now felt structured and watchful. Every sound carried intention. The students in the program came from different backgrounds. Some had grown up surrounded by instruments and lessons. Others arrived with raw ability and little guidance. Daniel noticed the difference immediately but did not feel out of place. He felt curious. Classes were small and focused. Instructors spoke clearly and patiently. They emphasized listening before playing, posture before speed, understanding before display. This approach suited Daniel naturally. At first, the technical exercises frustrated him. Repeating scales slowly felt dull compared to the freedom he once felt at home. His fingers resisted precision. Tension crept into his hands when he tried too hard. One instructor noticed and reminded him gently that control did not mean force. She showed him how relaxation created strength. Daniel practiced again and felt the difference immediately. Days grew longer as responsibilities increased. School mornings, lessons, afternoons, practice, evenings, homework. Fatigue followed him constantly. Some nights he fell asleep at the keyboard. His mother watched with concern but did not interfere. She trusted Daniel's judgment and encouraged balance, reminding him that rest mattered as much as effort. There were moments when doubt returned strongly, especially when Daniel watched other students perform with confidence and speed. He wondered whether starting late would always keep him behind. One afternoon, during a group lesson, Daniel struggled with a passage and stopped playing abruptly. Frustration showed on his face. Silence filled the room. The instructor did not correct him immediately. She waited, then asked him what he was trying to say with the music. The question surprised him. Daniel paused, then answered honestly that he wanted the piece to feel hopeful rather than perfect. The instructor nodded and asked him to play again with that intention. When he did, the mistakes mattered less. The sound felt truer. The instructor smiled slightly and moved on. That moment stayed with Daniel. He began approaching music differently. Focusing on meaning first and mechanics second, the director observed these sessions from time to time. His presence no longer carried dominance. He listened quietly and spoke only when necessary. His guidance focused on long-term growth rather than immediate results. Daniel noticed the change and felt less pressure. He no longer felt like he was being tested constantly. He felt guided outside the hall. Daniel's life shifted subtly. Teachers at school noticed his discipline and focus improving. Music seemed to sharpen his attention rather than distract it. One music teacher invited him to join a small school ensemble. Daniel hesitated at first but agreed. Playing with others challenged him in new ways. He learned to listen closely to timing and balance, to support rather than lead. The experience deepened his understanding of collaboration. Back at the hall, the program introduced small performance workshops. Nothing public, only students and instructors. Daniel felt nervous but prepared. During his first workshop performance, his hands trembled slightly. Memories of laughter flickered briefly, but the room felt safe. No one mocked or judged. He played carefully, allowing space between notes. When he finished, the response was calm and constructive. Feedback focused on clarity and growth. Daniel felt relief rather than pride. He realized that safety allowed learning in a way pressure never had. As weeks passed, Daniel's confidence grew quietly, not through praise but through consistency. He practiced daily with intention and patience. He learned to accept correction without taking it personally. Mistakes became information rather than failure. One evening after practice, the director invited Daniel to walk with him briefly through the empty hall. The lights were dim, and the space felt reflective. The director spoke honestly. He said that when they first met, he had confused confidence with authority and humor with judgment. He admitted that Daniel's presence had challenged him. Daniel listened quietly, unsure how to respond. The director said that talent carried responsibility on both sides, the responsibility to nurture and the responsibility to protect. He told Daniel that his voice mattered and that the program existed to serve it rather than shape it into something else. Daniel felt something settle inside him. The words were not dramatic, but they felt important. At home, Daniel began composing small melodies of his own. Nothing formal, just expressions shaped by memory and emotion. He did not share them immediately. One instructor eventually heard him playing quietly after hours and listened without interruption. Afterward, she encouraged him to keep writing. She said originality grew from listening inward. The program continued steadily. Evaluations came and went without drama. Daniel's progress was noted consistently, though modestly. His mother attended one small recital and watched him play with calm focus. She felt pride but also gratitude. Her son looked at peace. Challenges still appeared. Some weeks exhaustion overwhelmed him, other weeks progress felt slow. But Daniel learned to trust the process. He no longer measured success by reaction. He measured it by understanding. As the season shifted, the program prepared for a larger internal concert. Still not public, but attended by extended faculty. Daniel was invited to perform. The invitation felt different from the first time he had been laughed at. This time it felt earned. He practiced carefully, choosing a piece that balanced simplicity and depth. He wanted to play something honest. The night before the concert, Daniel sat quietly at home and thought about how far he had come, not in distance, but in courage. He realized that the director's laughter had not broken him. It had revealed something stronger. The boy who once played to escape now played to communicate. And the hall that once doubted him was slowly becoming a place of belonging. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. Dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them.